If every TSMC factory on the island of Taiwan stopped operating tomorrow, the global economy would begin to collapse within weeks. Not months, weeks. Your phone would be the last one you ever buy. Your car would be one of the last built. The Pentagon has run the numbers. They didn't publish them. TSMC manufactures an estimated 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm, the United States military, all of them depend on a single company, on a single island, 100 miles from mainland China. That is not a supply chain. That is a single point of failure for human civilization. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to 1987. Taiwan was not a tech powerhouse. It was a developing economy trying to find its footing after decades of authoritarian rule. The government had an idea, arguably one of the most consequential industrial bets ever made. They would build a semiconductor industry from scratch. They recruited Morris Chang to run it. Chang was 55 years old, an age at which most executives are planning their retirement, not their magnum opus. He had spent 25 years at Texas Instruments, rising to senior vice president before being passed over for CEO. He was, in the polite corporate phrasing of the time, available. Chang took the job, and then he did something that the entire semiconductor industry said was either revolutionary or suicidal. Nobody was quite sure which. He invented a business model that had never existed before, the pure-play foundry. Before TSMC, chip companies designed their chips and built them. The design team and the fab were the same company. Intel, Motorola, Texas Instruments, vertically integrated, capital-intensive, and territorial. Chang looked at this model and saw an inefficiency dressed up as a tradition. He proposed something radical. TSMC would build chips for other companies. Only that, nothing else. TSMC would never compete with its customers. It would never design a chip. It would never sell a product under its own brand. It would be purely and completely a manufacturer for hire. The industry called this a contract foundry. Chang called it the future. The industry laughed. Chang had the last laugh. He usually did. The model worked because it unlocked something the industry hadn't fully valued: specialization at scale. Suddenly, small teams of brilliant engineers could design cutting-edge chips without needing billions of dollars in fabrication equipment. Companies like Qualcomm, ARM, and eventually fabless startups across Silicon Valley could exist because TSMC existed. TSMC didn't just build chips. It built an entire ecosystem of companies that couldn't survive without it. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, TSMC grew steadily, respected, profitable, but not yet dominant. The turning point came not from a single decision, but from a technology race that only one company was positioned to win: the transition to smaller and smaller transistors, what the industry calls the process node. A transistor in 1987 was measured in micrometers. By 2020, TSMC was manufacturing at 5 nanometers, roughly the size of 25 silicon atoms placed side by side. This is not an engineering achievement. This is closer to controlled insanity, and TSMC was better at it than anyone else on Earth. Intel, once the undisputed king of semiconductor manufacturing, stumbled badly on the transition to 10-nanometer chips. They announced it would arrive in 2016. It didn't ship until 2019. Those 3 years were not just a delay, they were an abdication. TSMC stepped into the vacuum and never stepped back out. Apple noticed. In 2013, Apple moved iPhone chip production to TSMC. The partnership that followed reshaped both companies. By 2020, Apple alone accounted for an estimated 25% of TSMC's revenue, a single customer, 1/4 of the business. The board approved the arrangement without visible hesitation. Of course they did. Then came Nvidia. Then came AMD, whose CEO Lisa Su made the strategic decision to go fully fabless and outsource all manufacturing to TSMC, a bet that transformed AMD from a company flirting with bankruptcy in 2015 into a trillion-dollar force by 2024. TSMC didn't just manufacture the chips, it manufactured the comeback. By 2023, TSMC's annual revenue exceeded $69 billion. Its market capitalization reached, at peak, over $500 billion, making it one of the most valuable companies in Asia. The Taiwanese government, which had seeded the company with public funds in 1987, had created something worth more than the GDP of most countries. That is a return on investment that would make a venture capitalist weep. But here is where the story stops being about business and starts being about something far more dangerous. TSMC's dominance created a geopolitical situation for which there is no clean historical precedent. A private company, incorporated in a disputed territory, controls the manufacturing capacity that every modern military on Earth requires to function. China claims Taiwan as its own territory. It has for decades. The People's Liberation Army conducts regular military exercises in the Taiwan Strait, and every time they do, the world's semiconductor supply chain trembles. Not metaphorically. Futures markets actually move. Because the people who run global finance understand something most news coverage buries. A Chinese blockade of Taiwan would be, functionally, a blockade of modernity itself. The United States government understands this. In 2022, Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act, allocating $52 billion in subsidies to rebuild domestic semiconductor manufacturing. The explicit goal was to reduce dependence on TSMC. It was the largest industrial policy intervention in American history, and even its architects privately acknowledged it would take a decade to matter. TSMC, for its part, agreed to build a fab in Phoenix, Arizona. Construction began. Then came the complications. American construction costs ran dramatically higher than Taiwan. Skilled workers were scarce. The first fab, originally scheduled to begin production in 2024, was pushed to 2025. The second to 2028. TSMC's chairman noted, with diplomatic understatement, that building in America was more expensive than anticipated. The Arizona workforce was apparently also more expensive than anticipated. Everyone smiled politely. Meanwhile, the European Union launched its own European Chips Act, 43 billion euros to build domestic capacity by 2030. Japan offered TSMC billions in subsidies to open a fab in Kumamoto, which opened in early 2024. The entire developed world was now, essentially, paying TSMC to be slightly less concentrated in one place. TSMC accepted the money. Morris Chang, now retired, reportedly watched all of this with some satisfaction. China, blocked from accessing TSMC's most advanced nodes by U.S. export controls introduced in 2022, accelerated its own domestic chip ambitions. SMIC, China's leading foundry, is reportedly operating at 7-nanometer production, years behind TSMC's 3-nanometer capabilities. The gap is large. The question is whether it is closing fast enough to matter. Nobody has a confident answer. What Morris Chang built, perhaps accidentally, perhaps with extraordinary foresight, was not just a company. It was a choke point, a single node through which the ambitions of every technology company and every modern military must pass. He created, in the driest possible economic terms, a natural monopoly of the most critical manufacturing process in the world. 37 years after a government handed him a business card and a modest mandate, the result is something no strategic planner fully anticipated. The lesson TSMC teaches is not about technology. It is about positioning. Chang understood that the company which controls the infrastructure beneath an industry controls the industry without ever having to compete in it directly. He built the roads. Everyone else built the cars. And when you build the roads, you collect a toll from every vehicle that passes forever. Every tech company that went fabless, every brilliant chip designer who never wanted to touch a fab, they handed their most irreplaceable dependency to a single supplier. And that supplier, to its considerable credit, never abused the position. But dependency doesn't become dangerous only when it is abused. It becomes dangerous the moment circumstances change. Taiwan's circumstances could change any morning. TSMC is not too big to fail. It is too essential to be allowed to fail, and those are not the same thing. One is a business problem. The other is a civilizational one. 37 years ago, a 55-year-old engineer who had just been passed over for a promotion took a government contract in a developing country and invented the architecture of the modern world. He was not named CEO of the year. He was named the most important person in technology, multiple times. Remember that. Next time, the company that invented the smartphone search engine then watched Google steal the entire market in 18 months while its board debated the color scheme of their new headquarters. Subscribe for more hidden empires.